My name is Keller. I'm a visual effects supervisor at DNEG.
Did you always imagine you'd be in some kind of creative role starting out, or is it something that you kind of discovered later on?
Yeah, interesting question. My parents always encouraged creative endeavors, anything from music to, in my teens, making films with my first camcorder. And so that was always a very strong interest I had. I grew up in Germany. And the old stereotype is true that they're really good at engineering and science, not so much the arts. And that's great. I love science and engineering. I guess even though I was making films every year when I was 16, 17, no one should ever see them, of course, but I was doing creative stuff. I was never really seeing myself as a filmmaker at that point. And so I went into computer science, and then only during that first degree was it that I sort of gained the confidence to do my next degree in a more creative field. And from there, and that was around the time that I started watching all kinds of tutorials. The old Video Copilot was a huge influence on me back then. And it's like, wait, I can do that. I know how to use software. And from there, it became more and more creative over the next 10, 15 years.
I love that. And I'm curious too, like for you, were you able to leverage a lot of your computer science background later on, moving into comping and everything?
Absolutely. I mean, my bachelor degree was in media computer science, right? So it was coding, but it was for computer graphics, games, video processing, very theoretical with a strong focus on sort of the mathematical side of it, but there was also a lot of applied projects where we used After Effects and coded games and stuff like that. Early VR in 2005, 2006. Mm-hmm. It was sort of an applied computer science, but absolutely when I got hired by DNEG in 2010, straight out of uni actually, they had just switched from Shake to Nuke. And not only did I know how to use Nuke because I'd used it at university, but there was no pipeline at the time for the 2D side of Nuke. And so I knew how to script. And that gave me a real head start at DNEG, because I was technically a roto artist who was, coding a bunch of pipeline tools and stuff, and that really propelled my career into much more advanced sort of areas in my first year. And I think to this day, and it's sort of advice I give to everyone, is it really helps to understand what's going on behind the scenes, whether that's with software or anything else you do. I would say don't just be a button pusher. Mm-hmm. Understand what's happening. When you don't have to understand C++ and code, but you should understand the basic principles of the tools you're using. I still find it extremely helpful.
Yeah, you mentioned Video Copilot earlier, and I think Andrew said something similar where for him, which kind of was the seed for him creating the company, was that he started messing around with expressions, and bit by bit it's kind of that like what if and start tweaking. And I think for him eventually it's kind of like, okay, now I'll hire a programmer and take it to the next level. But I think a lot of the time, the more that you understand that, every button I'm pressing is literally just calling something in the API, the more that you start thinking, well, what if I did that myself? And that's kind of the bug that makes you go down the rabbit hole and learn more. So I love that. Yeah. For you too, like you went straight from university to going to DNEG. What was it like landing your first job? Like, was that something that you had to go through a lot of rejection, or was it you're the miracle one who just walked right in like, I've arrived, I graduated, now let's get to work?
Yeah, I feel like I got really lucky that they hired me. I wasn't even halfway done. It was a year-long master's degree in Bournemouth in the UK. And I got hired at the beginning of my third term, 3 out of 4. And I think I was the first in my class, which it was just incredibly exciting at the time. And DNEG they had just done Inception. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of the golden era of the London VFX industry, you know, with the Harry Potters just about to wrap up, and the next wave of big Hollywood blockbusters coming in. So it was an incredible feeling, and I don't know if I'll ever get it again, because just moving from the South Coast to London, everything just seemed magical at the time. And DNEG was such an awesome place to work at, because you had all these teams that worked on these now legendary films. You know, you had the Paul Franklin crew about to win their first Oscar at the time, you know, and DNEG was just taking the first steps into bigger territory with John Carter at the time and Total Recall. It was an incredible feeling. I think partly because of my more technical background, I had a really easy time picking up on software like Houdini and Nuke, which we learned at uni. And so my first couple of projects I think showed enough potential that DNEG were like, yeah, we can hire him. And at the time they were still, and everyone was still hiring local roto prep and match move artists, which is something that's not really happening anymore these days, because it's all outsourced, right? You had to show potential, because obviously they weren't just hiring you for a job, but they were thinking long term. But at the same time, it was just a roto position. So it wasn't, and everyone was hiring like crazy at the time. So I don't feel particularly special for being the first one. A lot of the people from my class got hired by DNEG Framestore MPC in London.
Still, that's great. I can definitely relate back to kind of having that golden time in your career. Like for me, I'd worked for a few years working in games and stuff like that, but like instead of working from home, the first studio job I got, where I actually got to move to Sydney in Australia when the industry is so small, there's only like 4 or 5 studios in the country, and it's like a whole different time. Whereas now, maybe it's just because we've been doing it for so long, but it definitely doesn't have the appeal. It's like, it's a fun gig, but it's definitely not like this magical world that, you know, it might have been at a different time in life.
Oh, you get super jaded. So really, you guys out there, enjoy your first 3 or 5 years. They're going to be the best.
Love that.
That's true. That's true for everything. That's true for relationships as well.
Yeah, I was going to say,